Hey, what's up everybody? I am Mike Escamilla and today's bike check is my United Caveman. When we first started designing this bike, I wanted to do something kind of special and sort of just for me, but it was a throwback to a time in bike riding that was probably the most important to me. It was the early 90s. I had just started getting into bike riding for real and I just was psyched. I was psyched on bike riding. I rode every day, every minute, to school, to the jumps, before school, after school, street riding. And so when I thought about making a frame, I wanted to do sort of throwback to that time. So I did the first bike that I bought on my own, which I think was in the 8th grade. And it was the 91 Harley Sport. We made an updated version. Even the first runs of the bike were a closer color to the color I had, as you can see. But when we did a second run, we made it yellow, and the graphics are a throwback to the early 90s Wilson Airlines wall frame, which I love. Talked to Ron, he was psyched. And I'm stoked on it. I actually like these graphics better than the first graphics. For a lot of people, well, obviously most people who weren't riding or alive back then, you see this bashguard and they just really wonder what it is, or they see this down tube and be like, oh, it's weak, and all these silly things that they've come to believe. But at the time, for a very few years, bikes had bashguards, and it was a time when bike riding was pretty gangster, actually. After the late 80s and the mid 90s, there was no big corporate sponsors, and even if you go through magazines, it goes from jerseys to all of a sudden just like people just look punk rock, leather jackets, dreads. Everyone's got their own style, and everyone's style changed and it was very unique. And then in about 95, when the X came back, you started seeing more jerseys and more corporate gigs and cleaner cut haircuts and things like that. So for me, I think it's really one of the greatest, if not the greatest time in bike riding, because I felt like bike riders took bike riding back and turned it into what it is today. When we were designing this frame, we were trying to think of kind of a little bit older guy, and I always run 20.5, but settled on 20.8. I think I'm gonna have to look at the specs, because I'm the kind of guy who just like, as long as it's sort of the right length, I just ride it. I've never been a guy that worried about how long his chain was, or how long the back wheel was, or the standing height. As long as the bar is in the right place and the frame is roughly the right frame length, I can get used to it in a couple hours. So we got the top tube comes in at 20.8. The head tube angle is 75. Seat tube angle is 69. The chainstay length, slammed all the way, is 13.65. Bottom bracket height is 11.8, it looks like. And the standover height is 8.8. I don't even know what all that means. Apparently you can manual farther, or it's more stable or something, but to me, bike is a bike. I mean, historically, I've kind of had the same bike since 1995. And we've gone, there's been tons of trends, shorter bikes, taller bikes, huge bars, different stuff, and I never really went along with the trends. No brakes, no pegs, 2 pegs. I just didn't really, for me, it didn't make sense. Why would I get rid of my front brakes when I really enjoy doing front brake stuff? And for me personally, I'm not really into the foot jam stuff. When I see it, I don't think it looks as good. Tricks with front brake are 100 times harder than foot jam stuff. I mean, that's why as soon as foot jams came out, you started seeing bar spins and nose picks more, and tail ups and nose picks more. There's cash roll and nose pick. Because I do run brakes, forks are a lot harder to come by. So these are actually some old volume forks with the 990 mounts. And I'm running the United Bicycle Union brakes. Brakes you seem like they're pretty standard all around, but sometimes you get like a lower profile, and I want to support my boys, Bicycle Union. What up, John? Cranks. Now, I'm running the GT Power Series cranks. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, I'm not sure when they discontinued them exactly, probably was early 90s, they made these aluminum cranks that were expensive, and they were the dopest cranks ever. Like, everyone had them. They came in all the best GTs, and I could never afford them. And by the time that my parents would buy me something like that, knowing that I'm into the sport enough to buy it, they would already discontinue them, and they'd moved on with the chromoly cranks, which I ended up getting, I think. So now that they had a chance to, these came back, I finally get to ride some cranks, which is great. For pedals, I'm running the Demolition Trooper pedal, which is just a plastic pedal. I was sponsored by Demolition for a long time, so some of these things are just, I'm used to it. And I'm running the 25, I believe 8 in the back, I'm not sure. But with the bashguard that we put in, you have to run a 25. It's the only way we cover it. Originally, we were gonna have a big plastic guard, but the molding on it was so expensive for how many bikes we were gonna make, it didn't make sense. So we have a metal guard. Because I ride so many pools, and I was, on the last day, I was working on something that I didn't get. I didn't want to chip the pool coping or make big chunks in it. So I actually took an old Demolition momentum tire, cut it, and bolted it to the bash guard. It's actually great. It's made it a lot easier to do bash slides and stuff because with the metal, it's so fast. It's deadly fast. One of the coolest things we did when we made the bash guard was we actually made it acoustically correct. I know it sounds silly, but with all this tubing that came down, and since I like to run my chain so tight, it actually works sort of like this. Check it out. Ready? Pretty cool, right? Well, you know, it's a whole another thing. I'm running a fit seat post that must have been the only one available, and a United seat. And the pegs are Demolition pegs. They're actually my old signature peg. I had a signature peg on Demolition years ago called the Nunchuck, and it was aluminum with a steel over it, as you see, and a lot of companies make now. I wanted to do a plastic peg, so we came up with a plastic peg version of it. It was called the Dumchuck, which was, for me, it was the Diet Nunchuck. So that's where that came from. For my wheel set, I actually, again, got what I could get. At the time, because of all the pandemic and everything, I got the United front, they only have front wheels in, so I got a United front rim, and for the back wheel, I have a Demolition back wheel with the Biz Rotator V4 Pro Free Coaster. I've actually never ran these little plastic hub guards. I always thought they were kind of silly. In all the 20-some years I've been grinding, I've broken like 3 spokes my entire time. I just grinded on the peg. I'm running the Odyssey Gyro mid levers. They're like kind of a medium length, and they got the sort of barrel adjusters where like the barrel goes into one big barrel. I've almost always ran Odyssey levers. They've always hooked me up, and they've got, I would say the best levers, if not the only levers. I've also got, I believe that's an Odyssey gyro as well. The stem actually, on the last trip I had with Jason Enns, whatever stem I had on before, stripped out, and so when we got back to I couldn't ride for a day. When we got back to his house, he found an old stem he had in a box. So this is an old Demolition stem from like 20 years ago, and I just never, it's on there now, so it'll probably be on there for the life of the bike. Bars, I'm running United bars. I wish I knew which bars they were. I tried to look it up, but I couldn't figure it out. All I know is they're the smallest bars that they made. I found some old Demolition grips. I realized how picky I get. So I found these old ones from like 15 years ago in a box, or 10 years. You can't run grips without a flange because you nick your knuckles on your brake lever, and I just like that feeling. I think it's a feeling of like, just feels like BMX to me, you know? Tires, this is the first time I haven't run Demolition tires in a long time, but I'm running the United Direct tire, and I love it. I always have a weird thing with tires. Once I find one I like, I try to stick with it, but I think that's about it. I mean, for me nowadays, I'm almost sold. I barely ever ride cement parks, and I barely ever ride wood. I'm mostly riding backyard pools. That's due to like a lot of things. I really enjoy it. I feel like I'm at a point where I work as a stuntman, and I don't want to get hurt riding my bike too much, you know? So I think pools kind of, they're different every time. And to be honest with you, it's more of the hunt and the adventure, finding them, you know, almost always you ride a pool, you don't get to ride it that much. So you kind of got to get everything you're going to get. I can do 4 to 8 tricks in a pool and challenge myself because everyone's different, it's fun. And it's more, to be honest with you, it's more the crew I've been hanging out with. That I just want to do stuff with them. Look, I even have I believe it's a flat tire there and a slow leak. And I'll be honest, at my age, a good flat will end a career. I'm telling you. I originally made a bashguard bike in 2000 on my Hoffman bashguard bike, and that was for 2 tricks. I wanted to do 270 to bash slide down a rail and a half cab 90 bash slide off. And I killed myself forever trying to get it. Never got one good enough to show. I really think if one of these young kids got a bashguard bike, it's just another place for you to grind and slide. You can invent an entire new world of tricks that no one else is doing. And to me, that's the most exciting thing when it comes to seeing someone ride bikes. I've always had this sort of 2-tier system on how I think of bike riders. I think of the people who are doing stuff really good and really, doing these big things and doing everything perfect. And then I have a bigger place in my heart for the guys who invent it. And even if it's small, they bring it out there and they push it and changing the way people view their surroundings and bike riding, that really get me psyched. But yeah, that's it. That's the United Caveman. Thanks a lot. See ya.